Hi, my name is Guy Lawrence and thanks for tuning into my podcast today. If you're enjoying these conversations and you want to check out more of this transformational work, be sure to come back to guylawrence.com.au and join me as we go further down the rabbit hole. Enjoy the show. Gabor, welcome to the podcast.
Guy, it's nice to be here with you.
I like to start the show, Gabor, just in case nobody's familiar with your work or you new listeners. But if you were at a dinner party right now around a table, you know, say 8 or 10 people, and you sat next to a complete stranger and they asked you what you did or what you do, what would you say?
Well, I would tell them that I'm a medical doctor who was in practice for 32 years and retired from medical practice now. I do a lot of international speaking now. I've written 4 books on health-related issues, beginning with my own diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. So I wrote a book about that called Scattered Minds, in which I say that it's not a disease, but it begins as a compensation in response to childhood stress. And then I wrote a book called When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress, which is really about how chronic illnesses like autoimmune diseases, multiple sclerosis, neurological diseases like Parkinson's, ALS, cancer are very often, not always, but the vast majority of cases, responses to life stress beginning with childhood trauma, and the body saying no to dynamics that the person has not been able to say no to because of their childhood programming. So that disease can actually be then not that I recommend this way of learning, but disease can actually be a wake-up call about how you've been disconnected from yourself.
So long.
And that the healing path has to do with reconnection. Then I wrote a book on addiction called In the Realm of Fungi Ghosts, because in family practice, what I did, I delivered babies, I worked in palliative care looking after terminally ill people and everything else in between. But I also did 12 years of work in North America's most notorious area of drug use, which is Vancouver, British Columbia, the downtown east side, where I worked with a population highly addicted to stimulants, to opiates, cannabis, alcohol, and so on. And what I learned there is that these people or addictions were not inherited diseases, but they were responses to childhood trauma. And addictions of all kinds are basically desperate attempts to soothe people's pain that they incurred during their development.
Yeah.
And so those are 3 of the 4 books that I've written. I've written a 4th book on parenting called Hold On to Your Kids. So to make a long story short, I'm a retired physician with interests in mind-body health, with the connection between life experience and health.
Yeah.
And I'm currently writing a new book, which will be published next year, called The Myth of Normal, Illness and Health in an Insane Culture, where ultimately I'm saying that illness in this society, by this society I mean neoliberal capitalism, is not an abnormality, but actually it's a normal response to an abnormal culture.
Yeah.
An abnormal culture in the sense of a culture that does not meet human needs. That's in a nutshell who I am and what I do. Now, in the course of all that, I haven't said that I have to do a lot of my own work, because I also have to deal with my own childhood trauma, have my own issues, continue to have them, and it's an ongoing project.
Your ongoing project. It's incredible, this work, and it just fascinates me because when I look out into the world, Gabor, I see we're more connected than ever, but more disconnected than ever. And I truly wonder how much people are aware that this work exists, and from our early childhood, how much of that upbringing is affecting the way we are being on a day-to-day basis as an adult. You know, I've just had a baby daughter. She's our first. She's 3 months old.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And I look at her and I see this incredible gift and teacher to myself every single day, and it's making me more and more aware of my own human conditioning, if you like. But I do think about the things that is influencing her, because I obviously want her to be her free, discover herself and be her unique spirit identity when she comes to adulthood, and I just wonder how far back do we go that is influencing her? Is everything that's happening in her life right now with us actually influencing her personality and what will become of her through to adulthood?
That was the case even before she was conceived, because what happens to our grandparents is passed on both biologically, but also most importantly emotionally through the parents to the child. And already the mother's emotional states during pregnancy program the child's brain and program the child's stress responsiveness, which is not to scare people. I'm just saying how it scientifically is. And so, no, that's not a passive thing. What I mean by that is you've already done a lot of work on yourself.
Mm.
When I became a parent, I had not. So that means your child starts off with an advantage. So the more conscious the parents are, and they're more emotionally attuned with themselves, and therefore with the child the parents are, the less any past stuff has to influence the child in the present. So that depends very much on the situation, stress levels, and consciousness of the parents. But yes, everything in her environment, and particularly you and your spouse and your relationship and the emotional atmosphere in the home, is programming your child right now, and goes a long way towards determining how she will feel about herself, how she'll experience the world, how she will see the world, how she will experience other people, what kind of relationship she'll enter into, how confident she'll be in herself, how connected to herself she'll be. All this is being determined right now.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And what you're saying then is no words even need to be spoken. It's about how she is feeling, essentially, because they haven't even formed an analytical mind yet. It's obviously at this.
Oh, and a lot of the parenting problem is that parents are told to train their kids with the right ideas, but long before kids have ideas, their emotional apparatus is being trained to understand the world in a certain non-verbal way, and that's much more important.
Totally.
So if you
So
take somebody like, I've just been reading and writing in my new book, I'm writing about politicians. So if you take somebody like Donald Trump, he's got all these ideas that people are out to get him, and that there are enemies out there, and the world is a hostile place. Long before he had these ideas, he had those experiences emotionally, because he grew up in a home with a sociopathic father who demeaned and tyrannized his kids and humiliated them. And that experience on the emotional level is what's fueling Trump's defensiveness, his need to be grandiose because he feels so small, he's got to make himself huge, his fear that he has to be aggressive because otherwise he'll be eaten alive, and all these ideas that he's got, and his denial of reality. Like right now, California, Washington State, and Oregon, the American states to my south here, are on fire. In Vancouver, we can't see the sky because of the smoke that's coming up from the States. And Trump is denying that it's climate change. Well, he's denying it because he learned as a child that reality is so painful, he has to deny it. He just cannot admit it. He can't acknowledge it. So what I'm saying is that these ideas that people have in adulthood, the kind of ideas that we accept and hold on to, has to do with our emotional take on the world, which is being shaped right now with your baby before she has any ideas. So the ideas are secondary. The emotional stance is primary.
yeah, well, the way I look at it then is that the feelings become familiar to us of that internal state.
Yes.
And once we go outside that familiar state, then it becomes unfamiliar. And if it becomes unfamiliar, then it almost becomes an unknown. And if it's an unknown, it feels like a threat. I mean, that's how I kind of see it in my mind. Would that be?
Well, that depends how comfortable you are within yourself. Like if you're connected with yourself and trust your gut feelings, you're not so afraid when you go out there.
Yeah.
Because you know that your gut feelings will be telling you what's dangerous and what isn't. So you don't have to keep looking for danger because you'll be warned when there's danger. But when we're disconnected, then the world becomes very unsafe because now we can't protect ourselves. Like if you look at, you're in Australia, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the Aboriginals in Africa, sorry, in Australia, do they feel perfectly comfortable out in the outdoors?
No.
No, do they? I mean, in their
Well,
natural.
in the natural state, absolutely. But
That's what I'm talking about. That's
oh,
what I'm
sorry,
talking
yeah. But I'm thinking they could be sitting on an uncomfortable rock for hours on end, but be very comfortable with it.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So when I said comfortable, I mean emotionally, because they're connected to themselves and they're connected to the world in a way that we in our so-called civilized society are not.
Yeah.
So we can't even imagine the degree of trust that they have in the world in their natural state.
Yeah, it's incredible. It just blows my mind because I grew up, I've never grown up in an academic background. I haven't had, like, I grew up in Wales, Gabor. You know, I played rugby and I started life as a plumber. I just didn't have I had no religious teachings or spiritual practices or any, like I had to go out and try and figure it all out for myself. And I've had some incredible healing moments in my life along the way by creating that reconnection back to myself, like you talk about. And the more I've learned and leaned into this work, I just don't understand why it isn't being taught from our age. It's like we know this information. It's certainly out there. And the more I've looked at this work and realized how much the body can, like you say, I'm currently reading The Body Knows the Score. You know, there's it holds so much information to be learned from, but yet we're not given any practices or tools to work with it. We're just kind of left to figure it out for ourselves half the time.
Oh, so yeah, and so that's part of the new book that I'm writing. So why is that the case? Well, if people, well, let me ask you a question. Before you had your experiences of awakening and connection, I don't know what your life was like. I mean, we don't know each other. But did you find yourself in situations which did not serve your needs, but you put up with them?
Yeah.
Okay. But why do you suppose you did that?
It's all I
By the way,
do.
would you now, in your present state of consciousness, would you chronically put up with situations that did not serve your needs?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, so if you wanted to organize a society where people will work in jobs that don't serve them, well, they'll pursue activities that destroy the atmosphere, that change the climate, that has them running around for objects and possessions that they don't need, that don't do them any good. Would you want to create people who are connected with themselves or who are disconnected from themselves?
Of course, disconnected.
That's the society we got.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it's a plot on anybody's part. It's just how it works. By the way, there's lots of plots, as we know. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. There's a guy I talked to. You might know of his work. His name is John Perkins, and he wrote a book called. His most recent book is something about the jaguar. It's actually about ayahuasca.
Okay.
You want to check it out. John Perkins. You might want to talk to him, actually.
I'd
He's
love
a
to.
wonderful guy. I can look up the title of his most recent book. It's something the jaguar, based on his ayahuasca experiences. But his big book, his first book was The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, something like that. And he used to work with big American corporations and American government selling American corporate agenda to third world countries.
Mm.
And if they bought into it, good. But he says, if you can watch his YouTube lecture, Confessions, and he says, basically he would say to these third world leaders, well, in my right hand, there's a package that you can accept and we can work together. And in my other hand, in case you don't accept the package, there's a gun. In other words, countries would be coerced into following along with the corporate American agenda. He did this for a living, until he had his own big awakenings. And John Perkins says to me, or he actually says in his TED talk, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a conspiracy realist. He knows there's lots of conspiracies, with the conspiracy to deny climate change,
Yeah.
the conspiracy to deny that opiates made by the drug companies are addictive, the conspiracies to make food addictive by adding just the right amount of sugar and salt and fat. I mean, these are conspiracies, active, non-controversially exposed conspiracies. There's plenty of conspiracies, but the system overall is not a conspiracy. It just works the way it works. And to keep itself going, it has to create people who are disconnected. And there's a million ways in which that disconnected it happens. But mostly, and in the home, it happens to the lack of consciousness of the parents.
Yeah.
Because relatively few people go through the awakening experiences that you've had the good fortune to go through. So unconscious parents bring up unconscious kids, and so it keeps going, and then everything in society then reinforces the unconsciousness.
Yeah, and it just it frustrates me because the interesting thing is as well, and I know you speak a lot about compassion, but after having those experiences and start to really see my own love, connect to myself and have love for myself and all the flaws and all the human conditioning that still raises its head every day,
Yes.
but be able to hold space for myself in that place and develop that relationship. It allows me to have more compassion for other people and actually look past their unconscious behaviors and flaws and see the human in someone, and then I think about what's going on in the world and I think, wow, if we all actually came from more compassion and we're all able to have a little bit more of an insight to what our own potential is, we could really start to see everyone in this together as opposed to this separation that's constantly driven in us. And quite often I get frustrated because I don't know what to do about it either, and
Well, look, in terms of what to do, look, first of all, let's face it, what you and I are talking about is not exactly new. I mean,
yeah.
a couple of guys called Buddha and Lao Tzu or Jesus talked about it a few thousand years ago. And you might say that they're total failures because look at them, as well known as their teachings are, is the world practicing them on any kind of a large scale?
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, the kind of tension that you're talking about has been going on forever. Now, under some conditions, it gets exacerbated. So when you have a system where the ethic is the individual profit and the individual experience and the individual ego, and when we're told that the system is based on dog eat dog and we're all against each other and we all have to get ahead at the expense of other people, this is what they teach. Those dynamics are exacerbated and heightened. And we can see with what results in the world today. But I totally understand the frustration. I share it, but at the same time, isn't that just the human condition? And in any generation, isn't all we can do is to do our bit, to wake up and to help other people um, see something of reality, you know? And any frustration that we have is our own problem, you know?
Of course. Yeah, it's fascinating because even though it was interesting because intellectually I got it when I would read books and listen to audios and podcasts, but it wasn't until I started to live it and experience it and be it that I
Yeah.
really understood it. There was a far greater difference. You know, what would you say to everyone listening to this today, right now, that are probably on that cusp? They might even be starting to reflect on themselves. They might be a parent thinking, you know, oh my God, what have I been teaching my child, or unconsciously, or whatever. I mean, and might be fearful of shining a light on themselves and retreat so they can continue on, like, or on that cusp. What would your advice be to those listeners?
Well, Saint Paul said something about the light dispels the darkness, you know? So why should we be afraid of the light? Whatever we learn can only help us. It may not be comfortable. I mean, I think excuse me, a lot of the reasons people don't do this work is because there's, well, to go back to President Trump, he says, I don't like to analyze my stuff too much because I might not like what I find. That's what he actually said.
Wow.
But you know what? Who else said the same thing? Hillary Clinton said the same thing. And a lot of politicians are like that. They don't really want to look at themselves. They don't mind, like, they want to just act it out in the world. You know, so it might not be emotionally comfortable when people look at themselves. You know, if I've talked to a lot of people who thought they come from happy families, they had maybe depression or anxiety or addiction, but they came from happy families. And then I asked them a few questions, and it turns out, no, their experience wasn't so happy. Well, that's painful to realize.
Mm.
But this whole society is based on helping people, or at least inducing people to run away from their pain. All the TV programs and the apps and the busyness and the addictive behaviors and the digital media, and it's all about getting us away from ourselves because it's so uncomfortable with alone with our own minds.
Yeah.
Because there's pain in there. But as I think you found, at some point, you had to find out that, yeah, you had some pain there. But was that liberating for you, or was that limiting for you? How did you experience it?
It was the most liberating thing in my life.
Yeah, so what people are afraid of is liberation, because to get to that liberation, they might need to experience some pain. There's nothing wrong with pain if it serves a noble cause.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we end up creating pain that doesn't serve any noble cause. And we just ended up passing it up to our kids. And so the biggest favor you can do to your children, any parent, is to actually work on themselves, not to work on the kid. Not how do I bring up my kid and how do I make them the best person? No, how do I connect? Because when I do, I'll be able to connect with my child in the way the child needs me to.
Hmm.
So if that's painful, that's pain that's noble pain. It's pain that's worth accepting.
Yeah. The pain that drove me to take action, to really start to flip the lens, if you like, to go on myself instead of the external world all the time. Even though at the time, like I look back now and I'm so grateful. I don't want to change anything, but at the time it was suffocating, slow and
Yeah,
steady, you know.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And in my book, When the Body Says No, that's the point I make, is that is that when people are suffocating themselves like that, at some point you might develop a disease, which is the body's way of saying, no, don't do this anymore. So when you don't know how to say no, the body will say it. Now, of course, as a child, we have no option. If the environment is in any way suffocating, and by that I don't mean to blame the parents because they're doing their best,
Yes.
but if they're unconscious, that to some degree is suffocating for the child. The child can only accept it. They can't do anything about it.
What does a child need from us? And like, because I think about my baby Ava, you know, and when she cries or there's something, all I want to do is just give her my love and hold space for her, you know, and try and be with her. And quite often I find myself, I might be in a position like I remember thinking yesterday, I'm exhausted. I'm absolutely exhausted. I said, but my daughter Ava is like not having any of that. Like, you know, she was demanding, she was crying at this point, and
Huh.
my human condition wanted to just figure out how to shut it up somehow and then impose my stuff on her. But at the same time, you know, there's a deeper part of me when I connect to my heart and myself that's just look, this baby just needs to be held in my love right now. But we hear so many different conflicting parenting things, like you say, about imposing things on the baby. You know, if they cry in, make themselves cry for hours, and
Yeah,
it's
I'll tell you what happens when the baby's crying. The baby's crying for a number of reasons. There could be physical discomfort, like
yeah,
they need to change. They might be wet and cold. They might be hungry.
yeah,
But also they could be physically quite comfortable, but emotionally they need contact.
hmm.
Now, if you and I became friends, we could hold each other emotionally in our thoughts and in our hearts without having any physical contact. But the baby is not that sophisticated yet. There's only one way a baby can connect emotionally, and that's to the senses.
Okay.
So they need to be held. Now, when you're not holding that baby when they need to be held, you're doing a number of things. First of all, they need to be held, and when the needs are not met, they get stressed. So you're releasing cortisol, the stress hormone in their brain, which interferes with brain development. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, you're giving a message. The message is your emotions don't matter to me. You don't matter to me. Now, you don't mean to deliver that message. You just think that it's better for the baby to cram themselves to sleep. But that's the message the baby gets. And you're teaching them about the world, which is that they're alone in the world. Because when they needed somebody, there was nobody there. So at the very least, you're giving them a mixed message. I love you and I don't care about you.
Yeah. Which
You
is a
know,
lot. Yeah.
which is very confusing. A lot of kids get that confused message. So that's what you're doing. So all this advice on to parents to leave their no. Do you know any mother cat that ignores their kittens crying?
Hmm.
Does a mother ape ever ignore the baby's cries for help? In Aboriginal societies, you know what they do? They never even put the babies down.
Wow.
And I've heard this from Canadian Indigenous people and in the Latin American jungle. I've seen this, and if you actually, and the problem for modern parents is that parenting was never meant to be done in a nuclear family. Nuclear family, like human beings have been on the earth for, I'm talking about our species. Human beings have been in the earth for, in some form, for millions of years.
Mm-hmm.
But our species, Homo sapiens, has been around for 150,000, 200,000 years, something like that. Until about 12,000 years ago, so like 99% or 90% of our existence, we lived in a hunter-gatherer band, small groups, where parenting was done by the group, where if the parent was too tired to pick the kid up, the uncle would pick the kid up, or the aunt would, or the cousin would, or the neighbor would, you know, like this just happens spontaneously. So there's too many demands on modern parents. So it's really stressful. Plus the parent has to go to work in the morning, maybe, you know. So we're parenting in a very unnatural environment. But the worst thing we can do is to impose our frustration and our fatigue on the baby. You know, so that the dilemma is that we're not parenting in a natural way.
Yeah.
And this question of putting the baby down, there's a book you might want to read. It's called The Continuum Concept. The
Okay.
Continuum Concept by Jean Liedhoff, I think, or Liedloff. Continuum Concept. She visits this Aboriginal tribe in the jungles of Latin America. It's an eye-opening book. She did this in the 70s.
Oh,
But there's a
wow.
lot of research on the same thing as well. By the way, if I can push my own,
Please.
if I can beat my own drum for a minute, I really hope you'll read the book I co-wrote called Hold On to Your Kids. It's a parenting book written with who I think is the world's most astute developmental psychologist, Gordon Neufeld. And it's about how in a society, precisely because we don't meet our kids' needs and we're not, and our kids don't grow up around us like they used to do in Aboriginal societies, kids have to attach to somebody. And for the most part, in our society, kids end up attaching to the peer group. And once they attach to the peer group, we lose them.
Mm.
Because the peer group values are very different from adult values. And a kid can't hold both of them. So once the child is heavily into the peer group via the internet or in person, because we haven't been around for them and we didn't meet their needs, it's so difficult to parent them.
Wow.
And so there's a natural way of parenting, which is based on meeting the child's attachment needs, and that's what people do naturally in Aboriginal societies or in societies that are still attachment based. And which in our society, not only don't do it, we even get parenting advice against it. Like we're told to practice time out against our kids, which means you say to a 2-year-old, if you don't please me, I'm going to deprive you of my presence, which is the main thing the child needs, is your presence. So what are you telling the kid?
Yeah.
Telling the kid that you have to shape yourself to please me, otherwise I don't accept you. So suppress yourself to please me. Is that the message you want to give your kid? But this is the advice that parents are given.
Within a system that's not supporting us.
Within a system that's not supporting us, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, it's a lot to take on board. I'm just when I look at these things and I'm just very grateful that I guess I'm having a child in my time of life
Yes.
right now, you know, because I don't know the parent I would have been 10, 15 years ago if I'd had her then, you know, and could put out.
I can tell you the parent that I was, and if there's anything in my life I wish I could walk back again, that would be it. I've learned a lot and grown a lot, and I have many, many things to be grateful for, and I am. But that's the one big issue. If I knew then a bit of what I know now.
But I think, you know, for all the parents listening to this, Gabor, then it's better to know that this exists so we can begin to make the change now with what we have.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I keep talking about Aboriginal societies, but there's a lot of modern science behind it. I mean, we now know that the human brain develops based on the emotional interactions with the environment. I'm talking about the circuits in the brain, which neurochemicals, chemical transmitters will be present in the brain in what quantities, which circuits will connect, which systems will develop, and how well, how much a child will be able to regulate their emotions. These are not subjects of surmise anymore. These are scientifically worked out realities and probabilities. A million books have been written on the subject, and the problem is parents are not taught them, physicians are not taught them, and teachers are not taught them, least let alone courts or judges. So if you look at Australia, where I visited a few years ago, and I've had to since, for lack of time, refuse invitations to return, at least up till now. Is it an accident that an Aboriginal child, teenager, has got 20 or 30 times of being jailed than a Caucasian one? Well, why is that? Because those happen to be the people in your society, just indigenous people are in our society, who used to know how to parent beautifully, much better than we do, but whose culture has been completely destroyed and distorted and suppressed. And as a result, they engage in behaviors that are destructive and self-destructive, and then we punish them for it. And so in Canada, 30% of the people in jail are First Nations origin. They make up 5% of the population. Check out in Australia what percentage of people in jail are Aboriginal people, probably way beyond their actual proportions in the population, because of what we've done to them and continue to do to them. When I say we, I mean mainstream society.
Yeah.
Instead of learning from what they could have taught us about parenting, we've suppressed that knowledge. And we suppress that knowledge in them because we can't stand to see the reality in ourselves. So all this knowledge is not, again, it's not just an emotional, intuitive thing. It's also scientifically worked out, if it has to be. Let me tell you an amazing study 2 years ago. You know what they proved? They scientifically proved that grandparents are good for grandkids. Now imagine that. How many PhDs did it take to figure that one out? I've got the study. And you know what else they showed? That the closer the grandmother lives to the grandchild, the better.
Wow.
Imagine they could prove that scientifically. Now, which grandmother couldn't have told you that 2,000 years ago?
Of course.
Here we have the science. We know it now.
Yeah, I know, and it breaks my heart at the moment because my grandmother, my mother, who's Ava's grandmother, is in Wales, and the only connection they can have at the moment is on Zoom every day.
Well, thank God for Zoom in that sense, right?
100%. Oh yeah, yeah. It still helps for sure.
Yeah.
Are you?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the world. If when you break it down like this, it feels like it has gone mad. The world's gone mad, and we don't see it within ourselves. Are you hopeful for the future, or do you think that?
Well, look, let me put it this way: if I didn't have some hope, actually, hope is an interesting thing. If I didn't have a sense of some possibility,
Okay,
why are you and I even talking? Like, no matter how much dysfunction we see out there, surely you must have a conviction that there'll be people interested in this stuff, that what you're saying is worth saying, that the people that you're talking to are worth introducing to your audience. Why? Because you believe in human possibility. So yes, I believe in human possibility. Noam Chomsky was once asked if he was a pessimist or an optimist, and he said, strategically, I'm an optimist, and tactically, I'm a pessimist, which means that in the long term, yes. In the short term, it's pretty bad. But if we didn't believe in that human possibility, and if we didn't ourselves have that call to speak to that possibility, I wouldn't be doing the work that I do. I wouldn't be doing the speaking that I do. I wouldn't be doing the writing that I do. And you wouldn't be doing the work that you do. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I believe in human possibility.
Yeah, beautiful. I am. I just got a couple of quick questions for you before we wrap it up, Gabor. And one question that occurred to me then: are there any like daily practices that you have or you've incorporated over your life into your life over the years that you found have really helped you support the work you teach yourself?
Yeah. Um, I'm not the world's most disciplined person, you know, but there's two things, well, three things actually for me. One is I'm married to an incredible woman. We've been married 51 years coming up.
Oh, wow.
And we could only stay married because we've continued to do the work together. So doing the emotional work and continuing to do it is essential.
Hmm.
I've learned a yoga practice a few years ago that when I don't do it, I notice my level of tension and disconnect goes up. So I have to say that right now, knock on wood, I've been quite disciplined about doing it regularly. Um, Having an ADD mind, it's hard for me to meditate. My mind goes all over the place. But with the yoga, with the mindfulness combined with the physical practice, I really do find that helpful.
Yeah.
And then number three, looking after my body.
Hmm.
So I don't do well when I don't exercise regularly, which I do. So I swear my bicycle, I have my elliptical machine at home, my exercise bike, you know, all that. So work on the emotions, doing the spiritual work, and then work on the body level.
Yeah.
And like you, every once in a while, I've participated in and sometimes led um, um, experiences with psychedelics. I've never had, I have to tell you, the kind of transformative experience that you described,
Mm-hmm.
but I've certainly seen many people have them, and I've gained some insights that way for sure for myself. Uh, I don't. It's not for me or anybody else to prescribe to anybody else what kind of work they should do, but you got to look after mind, body, and spirit. And if you don't, you're going to pay the price.
Absolutely. Have you ever wondered if a few politicians were to do a ayahuasca ceremony, what might happen?
Well, it's a complicated question because something in you has to be guiding you to do it.
Mm.
So if I could just slip ayahuasca into Donald Trump's, or for that matter, your Australian prime ministers. But I've heard him say some pretty orangutan things about climate and so on, you know?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if I could slip a substitute ayahuasca for the cup of coffee, it would not do them any good. They'd just be terrorized because there has to be some guidance in them that wants to have that experience, that opening. So what I'm saying, but if they had that guidance, they would not be the politicians that they are.
Yeah,
So it's kind of a moot question in that sense.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you certainly have
Like,
to
like,
be.
like, why are they so desperate to have power? Mostly because they feel very powerless within themselves. Like a Hitler, you know, the Fuhrer, you know, everybody adulated. He was just an empty, scared little man who totally fell to pieces when the world that he tried to create turned to shambles around him.
Mm,
And all these powerful leaders, no, not all of them, but many of these powerful political leaders, they have a lot of fear inside them, and that's what drives their need to be so grandiose. So when you say what would happen if they had these experiences, well, if they're open to those experiences, they would not be who they are.
True. Yeah. Fair
But
enough.
what if Donald Trump at some point, you know, his niece just published a book. Maybe you've heard about that.
No, I haven't. I haven't.
Oh, Donald Trump's niece is a psychologist, and she just published a book about her uncle,
Oh, wow.
and it's about how traumatized he was as a child by their sociopathic father. Mary Trump, the psychologist, her father dragged himself to death. So traumatized he was. This is Trump's brother.
Wow.
And Mary Trump talks about how scared and alone and how frightened Donald Trump actually is, but is still functioning like a 3-year-old scared little boy. It's a new book. It came out about a month ago.
Incredible.
Yeah. And I've been saying about him for years that he's a traumatized person, but it's evident. But now here's this book by his psychologist niece saying the same thing in great detail. So if Trump did open to that experience, he would grow a lot. He would learn a lot. He would need that. He does not need to be Donald Trump. He does not need to be fabulously wealthy. He does not need to be the world's most powerful person. He doesn't need to. Does not need to fear the universe like the way he does. He would not need to deny reality because he could accept his pain rather than deny it. That actually it's possible for him to be loved, none of which he believes right now. So he could learn those things, but he'd have to be open to the experience of learning.
Totally. Totally. Yeah.
Because even for you and I, who might say we're open to those experiences, how difficult it is to practice what we already know, even if we know it, just as you said, right?
I remember when I did my first ayahuasca journey, I was terrified. And it was the first time I fully felt myself having to fully surrender and accept before I went into that journey in my entire life. Like I'd not been pushed to that place before in that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
And that was the lesson. That's the huge lesson that came out of it. And I was like,
That's
wow.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest lesson, and I'm really not sure that I fully learned it yet. In fact, I could tell you, I have not fully learned it.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's incredible. Incredible. One last question for you, Gabor, before we wrap it up. And that is, with everything we've covered today, is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners to ponder on?
Well, the method that I teach is called compassionate inquiry, which simply means that everything that arises for you, you could deny or suppress or resent or want to get rid of, or you could be curious about it. What does this mean? How did I acquire this belief? How did I develop this reaction? You could be curious about it, and you could be curious about it compassionately, so that it's not that I'm a bad person or that there's bad things about me. It's that something happened and I developed a certain kind of adaptation. And so how did I do that? And I did it because I had no other way of surviving or managing my situation. So be compassionate towards yourself and towards your parents if you can, as much as they screwed up, and they did. They were doing their best. And even if they treated you horribly, they were still doing their best. Which doesn't mean you don't have the right to be angry with them. But being angry with them and judging them are two totally different things. So have this compassion to be curious about why did they do that? Why did I do it? And so on. And so compassionate curiosity is my message to the world, to the extent that I can deliver it. And if I may say, people can check out that program and all my other stuff at my website, which you can list for your listeners if you want to.
Absolutely.
And apparently I have a YouTube channel. You don't have to, there's no fee to subscribe to it, but apparently you can go to my website and subscribe to my YouTube channel. So there's dozens of my talks on YouTube, so you can check out all this stuff. There's my books, which I won't list again, but they're available, including in Australia. So there's lots of ways to check out my work, and those that are inspired to do so, I hope they will.
I have no doubt they will. And for everyone listening, if they paused right now and scroll down, there'll be show notes listed of all the people referenced, all the
Great.
links that Gabor speaks of as well. So it'll all be there for everyone as a resource moving forward.
In fact, you know what? If I may mention, you mentioned talking to Jeff Rediger.
Yeah.
So what did Jeff find out? Jeff found out that the people who recover are people who reconnect with themselves.
Yeah.
So it's that connection. That's what really matters.
Totally. Gabor, I just want to thank you. Thank you for giving me your time and coming on the show, and for everything you do. And your work honestly has been an influence in my life too. And it's been my pleasure to just be able to hold space to you and have a conversation for an hour. And I hope the listeners, I hope I've done it justice, and I hope the listeners gain something from it too. And
a pleasure to speak with you. It really is.
Yeah. Thank you, Gabor. I appreciate it.
Thank you.